All right, strap in, everyone. We're going deep on this one. Plato's Republic.
Oh, yeah, this one's a classic.
We've got all your notes here, some key passages from the text itself. I'm guessing you want that cheat sheet to the Republic?
All the big ideas, right?
We'll hit those, but trust me, there's going to be some seriously mind-blowing stuff along the way.
Well, Plato's asking these huge questions that we're still grappling with today, right? What even is justice? Like, really?
Yeah.
What makes a society truly ideal? And what does it even mean to live a good life?
It's crazy, right? Thousands of years ago, and it's still so relevant. But, okay, I've got to say something's been bugging me. I've read other Socratic dialogues, and something about Socrates and the Republic. He's different.
You're picking up on something really important. He's not just playing his usual game asking all those questions. I think Plato's using Socrates to put forward his own, like, bolder ideas.
Oh, okay, so it's not just me.
Definitely not. Look at how he deals with the sophists, for example.
Hmm.
In the early parts of the Republic, he's totally slamming them as manipulative, these rhetoricians who just care about winning arguments.
Right.
But then later, his stance kind of softens. It's subtle, but you start to see, I think, Plato's own thinking evolving.
Uh-huh. So there's this deeper shift happening underneath it all. Okay, so let's dive into the actual content here. I mean, one of the big, obviously, themes is justice.
Mhm.
And early on, Socrates is talking with Cephalus and Polemarchus, and their initial definitions of justice seem pretty simple.
Yeah, they seem simple. Cephalus, the old wealthy guy, says
Mhm.
it's about honesty, paying your debts.
Right, basic stuff.
But Socrates throws a curveball. He's like, imagine you owe a weapon to a madman.
Uh-oh.
Right. Should you really return it, knowing he could cause harm?
Okay, now it's getting complicated.
Right. Suddenly, those simple definitions aren't so simple anymore.
It's classic Socrates, using these thought experiments to blow up what we think we know.
Exactly. And then things get even wilder when Thrasymachus jumps into the conversation.
Oh, yeah, he's a firecracker.
He's like, justice. Forget about justice. It's all about the strong doing whatever they want. Might makes right.
He doesn't hold back.
Not at all. But remember, Plato's presenting us with all these contrasting views to make us think. He wants us to challenge our own assumptions about justice.
Right, to really question what we believe.
Exactly. So to counter this whole might makes right thing, Socrates compares rulers to shepherds.
Shepherds, okay, I'm not following.
Think about it. A good shepherd takes care of the flock, rightly. It's not about what the shepherd gets out of it.
Okay, yeah.
So are rulers really just power hungry, like Thrasymachus says, or should they be like those good shepherds, putting their people first?
It's a really interesting comparison. You start to think about what the purpose of leadership really is.
Exactly. That's what Plato wants us to do.
Okay, well, speaking of challenging ideas, one thing that really threw me off was Plato's stance on censorship. Like, he actually suggests banning certain poetry and stories.
Yeah, it sounds pretty extreme, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
But we got to put it in context. Plato is not saying all art is bad. He's worried about what these stories are saying, especially the ones about the gods.
The myths.
Yeah. He thinks they could, like, warp young minds, give them a messed up view of the divine. Imagine stories of Zeus, beating up his own father, or gods tricking mortals and stuff.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
if those are your role models, what kind of society are you going to build?
Right, it's not just about art for art's sake, it's about the messages it's sending.
Exactly.
But if some stories are off limits, then how do you teach people the right values?
Well, that's where Plato drops this bomb on us, the noble lie.
Or what now?
The noble lie. The idea that sometimes a made-up story, a fiction, can actually be good for society.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, he thinks it can help create harmony, order, especially with complicated ideas like justice.
Because sometimes you got to bend the truth a little.
It's a tricky concept, but he gives us this example, the myth of metals. Imagine everyone's told that people are born with souls made of different metals: gold, silver, bronze, or iron.
Okay.
And that metal determines your place in society. Gold soul, you're a ruler, of course. Silver, you're an auxiliary like a warrior. Bronze, you're a craftsman. And iron, you're a worker.
Hold on. So you're saying if I'm born with a bronze soul, I'm stuck being a blacksmith my whole life?
Well, not necessarily. There's a twist. This myth, even though it's totally made up, it hints that social mobility is possible. Like, imagine you're born to iron soul farmers, but you show a real talent for leadership.
You get bumped up to silver.
Maybe even gold.
So even though it's this predetermined thing with the metals, there's still room for, like, individual talent to shine through.
Exactly. But it raises so many questions, right? Who decides who gets to move up? What are the criteria? Is it really fair?
Right? It's like, is this noble lie just a way to control people?
They can think they have a chance when maybe they don't. Yeah,
Right.
that's a debate we're still having today, right?
This whole noble lie thing, it's like opening a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you think about all sorts of ethical
Oh,
dilemmas.
yeah, it definitely does.
And it's wild to think that Plato, who was all about truth and justice, would be okay with using deception, even if it's for a supposedly good reason.
It definitely challenges how we think about things. And this whole noble lie thing, it takes us right to another controversial part of Plato's Republic. His ideas about women.
Oh, here we go.
Get this. He thinks women should train alongside men as guardians.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Women warriors in ancient Greece. That's like revolutionary, even for us today.
Yeah, it was totally radical. For his time, I mean. Plato acknowledges that, men and women are physically different, obviously, but he says their souls, like their capacity for reason and virtue, that's the same.
So he's basically saying gender roles are bogus.
Kinda. He thinks they're equally capable of leading, defending the Republic. It's like he's saying true leadership. It comes from the mind, not the body.
Okay, so in Plato's ideal world, you could have women generals, women philosophers running things.
Exactly.
But wait, didn't he also say, like, people are born for specific roles based on those soul medals? How does that work if women can do anything?
Oh, that's a good question. It does seem kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, he's all about souls being designed for specific roles, but then he's saying women, even though traditionally they had their roles, they can actually do anything, like break through those limits.
So maybe the soul medals aren't the whole story.
Right.
Maybe there's something about individual talent, drive, that can, like, break through those predetermined
I'm
boundaries.
getting it. It's like he's saying don't underestimate anyone, no matter their gender, their social status.
I like it. A message that's still relevant today, for sure.
Okay, but let's be real. Even in this perfect-sounding republic, there's got to be conflict here. What about war? Oh, he definitely talks about war. And it's pretty surprising, actually.
What do you mean?
He says, okay, even in the ideal state, war happens sometimes. And this is the crazy part he actually gives, like rules of engagement, especially when fighting other Greeks.
Rules like what?
One big one, no enslaving other Greeks, no matter who wins.
Oh, wow.
He also says you gotta respect the dead, from both sides. And get this, he's against destroying too much property. No scorched earth stuff.
Yeah, that's, those are pretty humane rules for war, especially back then.
Right. You could almost call it an early version of just war theory.
It makes you wonder if, like, any of that thinking influenced later thinkers or even, like, laws about war we have today.
Really makes you think.
Okay, let's move on from war. Back to Plato's big ideas. One of the most famous and maybe the most misunderstood is this whole philosopher king thing.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
He's really going out there with that one.
Absolutely. He's basically saying the best ruler, a philosopher. It sounds kind of crazy, right?
Sure. Yeah. Can you imagine? Philosophers in charge.
Right. But he's got a reason for it. He says only people who truly understand justice, the good, those eternal forms, remember those?
Yeah.
He says only those people can lead well, fairly. He uses this analogy, the divided line. Imagine a line cut into two parts, not equal though. The smaller part, that's the visible world, like what we see around us. The bigger part, that's the intelligible world, the world of forms. The philosopher king, he's climbed up that line past the illusions, the shadows. They get to the true reality.
Okay, so you can't be a good leader if you're, like, stuck in the superficial stuff. You need a deeper view.
Yeah, that's it. But how do you even get to that deeper level? Like, are you just born with it?
Or can anyone become a philosopher king?
Right. Good question. It's not about being a genius, necessarily. It's a journey, a process. Remember the allegory of the cave?
Oh, right, with the prisoners.
Exactly. The prisoners chained in the cave. They're like us, stuck in this world of appearances. All they see are shadows. They think that's reality. But the philosopher, they break free. They climb out of the cave into the sunlight. They finally see things as they really are.
So it's about, like, escaping our limited senses, all those preconceived ideas we have. But that sounds hard.
It is hard. And even if you manage to see the light, like Plato says, then you got to go back down into the cave, try to explain it to the people still stuck there.
Oh, man. Good luck with that.
Right. Like, imagine trying to describe the internet to someone who's never even seen a computer.
Good point. So if we're talking about actually building a society based on Plato's ideas, it's not enough to just put smart people in charge. You need everyone to be willing to question, to search for truth.
Exactly. And that's a challenge not just for politics, but for like everything, how we live our lives, how we learn, how we treat each other.
Okay, it's pretty big picture stuff.
Hmm.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty. How does this philosopher king idea actually work in Plato's Republic?
Well, he divides his ideal society into three classes, kind of like those soul medals we were talking about. You got the guardians, those are the philosopher kings, then the auxiliaries, and the producers.
Okay, so guardians of the brains. What are the other two groups doing while they're off contemplating the forms?
The auxiliaries, they're the muscle, the warrior class. They defend the republic, keep order. Think of them like well-trained soldiers, brave, disciplined.
Okay, the thinkers and the fighters. Makes sense. What about everyone else? Where do the producers fit in?
They're the backbone. The producers are everyone who's, well, producing stuff. Farmers, craftspeople, merchants, anyone who keeps things running.
So it's like a hierarchy. Rulers, warriors, and then everyone else. I know it sounds kind of rigid.
Hmm?
Is there a risk of some people getting stuck?
That's a good point. It goes back to what we were saying about social mobility, that
Yeah.
myth of metals. Plato's trying to balance things, you know? He wants order and fairness, recognizing that people have different talents.
It's a hard balance to strike, for sure.
It is, and it's a debate that's still going on today, right?
Yeah.
How do we build societies that are fair, A&D functional?
Yeah. How do you create opportunity for everyone but still keep things, running smoothly?
That's the question.
And you know what's even crazier? Plato doesn't stop at analyzing society. He goes deep into the human psyche, too.
Yeah.
He has this theory that, your soul is a mirror of the state.
Oh, yeah. That's where you see his psychological insights coming in. He describes this parallel between the soul and the state, this decline they can both go through.
I'm sensing a pattern here. Plato loves his parallels.
Mhm.
So how does it work, this decline?
He starts with the ideal, the just soul, A&D, the just state. Remember, for Plato, justice is about balance, order. In the individual soul, the rational part is in control, guided by wisdom, virtue. The spirited and appetitive parts, they're kept in check. It's like a chariot driver, keeping those horses under control.
So no impulsive desires, no emotional outbursts.
Exactly. And in the state, justice means each class does its job, guardians rule wisely, auxiliaries defend bravely, producers work hard. Everyone's contributing to the harmony of the whole.
Sounds like a utopia. But I guess things don't always stay perfect, right?
Sadly, no. Plato says both the soul and the state, they can degenerate. He describes this process where aristocracy, that ideal state ruled by philosopher kings, it decays into democracy.
Democracy.
Yeah. Now the focus shifts from wisdom to, honor military glory.
So still functional, but with a bit more, ego involved.
Exactly. And from there, things slide even further into oligarchy.
Oh,
Now it's all about wealth, possessions,
sounds familiar.
right? The gap between rich and poor gets bigger. Social tensions start rising.
Okay, this is getting a little too real. What happens next?
Buckle up, it gets even worse. Oligarchy, with its focus on individual gain, it collapses into democracy.
Wait, democracy, isn't that supposed to be a good thing?
You'd think so, right? But Plato sees it as another step in the decline.
Seriously, why? What's wrong with democracy?
He's worried that even though democracy is about freedom, equality, it can also be chaotic, unstable. He thinks people are too easily swayed by emotions, you know?
They make bad decisions.
And without strong, virtuous leaders, things fall apart. It's like, sure, everyone gets a voice, but what if they're all shouting for the wrong things?
He's not a fan of my rule, is he?
Not really, but it's important to remember he was writing in ancient Athens. Their democracy had its own problems. He wasn't necessarily saying all democracy is bad, just that it's not perfect. It needs those checks and balances.
Okay, makes sense. So if democracy isn't the end of the line, where does it go from there? What's the worst case scenario?
Tyranny.
Oh, boy.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Plato describes the tyrannical man. He's ruled by his desires, totally isolated, paranoid. He's got all the power, but he's actually miserable.
So it's not just about political systems, right?
Right.
It's about what's going on inside.
Exactly. A corrupt state, it reflects corrupt souls.
Deep stuff. It makes you think about, dystopian novels and stuff,
Yeah.
where the bad government is a reflection of the people's inner darkness.
Yeah. But Plato doesn't stop there. He also takes us to the afterlife.
Oh, right. The myth of the soldier who comes back from the dead. This is where things get trippy.
It is.
So what happens? What does see when he's dead?
He describes this judgment scene. Souls get assessed, then they get to choose their next life.
Wait, they get to choose?
It's like a cosmic lottery.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. Souls who've learned from their mistakes, cultivated virtue, they tend to make good choices.
They pick lives that will make them happy.
Exactly. But the ones who haven't learned their lessons, they usually fall back into old patterns, choosing lives based on the same desires, vices that messed them up before.
It's like they're stuck.
Yeah, repeating the same mistakes over and over.
That's a powerful message. It's not just about what we do in this life, but like what it does to our souls for eternity.
Exactly. And it shows how important this whole search for justice is. For Plato, it's not just some abstract idea, it has eternal consequences.
Wow. We've covered so much.
Hmm.
Justice, the ideal republic, education, the cave, the afterlife. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But that's what's so great about the Republic. You can keep coming back to it, and you'll always find something new.
It's like an endless conversation.
It really is.
Sometimes I wonder about Plato himself. Was he always this serious? Or did he ever, like, relax, have a laugh? I mean, the guy who came up with the allegory of the cave, he couldn't have been all doom and gloom all the time, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's easy to get lost in his ideas, forget he was a real person. But yeah, there's definitely a lighter side to him.
Tell me more. I need a break from all this intensity.
Well, if you look at some of his other dialogues, you see more of his wit. He uses satire sometimes, makes fun of his opponents.
So he knew how to have a good debate.
Definitely. And even in the Republic, you find moments of humor, irony.
It's like he's saying, look, philosophy is important, but we can still have some fun with it.
That's it. And that's why it's still so engaging. It's not just some dry text. It's a lively conversation,
Yeah.
Draws you in, makes you think.
No, it's like he's inviting us to join in.
Exactly. And that's the best thing about philosophy. It's a dialogue, with these great thinkers across time.
Yeah, it's not just about memorizing stuff. It's about engaging with these ideas.
Exactly.
I'm starting to think maybe the best way to approach the Republic is not as this, like, giant, intimidating book,
Yeah.
but as an ongoing conversation, a journey of discovery.
I love that. And it's a journey that never really ends.
So even though we're at the end of our deep dive today, it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, we are. Just the beginning. It's easy to get caught up in all these big ideas and theories. But we got to remember, the Republic wasn't written in a vacuum, Plato was living in ancient Greece.
Right. It was a real society with real problems.
Exactly. And Athens, they were going through this whole democracy experiment.
Which, let's be honest, didn't always go so well.
Yeah, there was all this infighting, power struggle.
And that whole Peloponnesian War thing, not exactly a shining example of, like, democratic harmony.
Right. So when you think about it that way, the Republic starts to seem less like some, pie-in-the-sky utopia and more like a response to what was happening around him.
Like he's saying, look, this Athenian democracy, it's not working. We need something better.
Exactly. It's like he's trying to create a blueprint for a society that can actually work.
A society that avoids the extremes,
Yeah.
right? Like tyranny on one hand.
And mob rule on the other.
He's looking for that balance.
That sweet spot, yeah, where you have order, stability, but you don't sacrifice justice, the common good.
And his answer, of course, is those philosopher kings.
Right.
Put the wise people in charge, let them steer the ship.
Guided by wisdom, virtue.
But, okay, be honest. Is that even realistic?
It's a good question.
I mean, how do you even find these philosopher kings?
Right, and how do you make sure they don't get corrupted by power?
That seems like a pretty big risk.
It is a big risk, and those are exactly the challenges Plato tries to address in the Republic. Like, how do you educate these guardians, select them? What kind of systems do you need to keep things in check? He doesn't give us, easy answers, but he makes us think about these things, the complexities of leadership, how to balance individual freedom with what's good for everyone.
It's like a constant tension, right, between those two things.
It is, and that's why, for Plato, education is so important.
It's not just about knowledge.
Right. It's about character, instilling a love of wisdom, a commitment to justice.
It's like that saying, knowledge is power, but character is more.
Exactly. You can be super smart, but if you don't have integrity, you're just going to use that knowledge to get ahead.
Right, for your own selfish reasons.
And that's one of the critiques people have of the Republic. They say all this emphasis on social control, the censorship, the rigid hierarchy, it doesn't leave much room for individual freedom.
Yeah, that whole banning poetry and stories thing, it does feel a little creepy.
It definitely raises some questions.
Like, who decides what's good art and what's bad?
It's a big debate, and it's one we're still having today, right?
Yeah.
Think about book banning, censorship in the media.
It's tricky. It's like, Everyone should have freedom of speech, but then there's that whole your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins thing.
Exactly. Finding that balance, it's not easy.
But that's what makes the Republic so relevant, I guess.
It forces us to think about these big questions.
Our values.
How we organize society, what kind of world we want to live in.
There's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I guess that's the point, right?
I think so. Plato's throwing down the challenge. He's asking us to imagine a better world, where individual freedom and the common good aren't at odds, where justice, virtue, those things actually win out.
It's a tall order. But hey, it's worth aiming for.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad we took this deep dive into the Republic.
Me too. It's amazing how a book written so long ago can still feel so, urgent.
It really is. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. If you could actually talk to Plato, what would you ask him? What would you challenge him on? What would you try to learn from him?
That's a great question to leave people with.
Because engaging with these classic works, it's not just about, being a good student or something.
It's about self-reflection, growth,
It's about connecting with these brilliant minds from the past.
and wrestling with the big questions, the questions that make us human.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Plato's Republic.
It's been a pleasure.
And a huge thanks to you, expert speaker, for sharing your insights.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone, keep those minds sharp and keep seeking the good. We'll see you on our next deep dive.